Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Hi there. Did you like that new bumper? That was courtesy of Electro Rock Cardiogram, a wonderful group that I found on Fiverr. They did that based on the old bumper that TC did. It was pretty impressive. Big things happening. Grenademan versus the Zombies is on Smashwords, and pretty soon it'll be on CreateSpace. Going to be working on a chapbook for another friend of mine called Emmett Other. I think I've talked about him from time to time, and I think TC had him read some stuff here on the podcast before. But, yeah, it should be interesting. We've also got a couple of interviews for Grenademan versus the Zombies. I'll see if I can put up a link or something when we have them. But in the meantime, here it is, Chapter 9. What if the apocalypse had came and no one noticed? Jarvi was, quite frankly, shocked. He had expected the snarks to be stealthy, but it had been 3 days, and according to the feedback he had been getting, he had over 10 million people under his power, and none but a very small handful of people beyond his control had noticed. And his reach was increasing exponentially every day. Jarvi had found out that touch was relative, and only a tiny part of the zombie needed to touch someone to expose them to the snark effect. In certain areas, he'd had his zombies entering the water tables or the food supply in order to spread their disease. He considered it cheating. This was not the apocalypse that he was looking for. He almost put a stop to it, but he wanted control of a few more areas before the next step. More importantly, he had a morbid curiosity about just how far this would go. 2 more days and he would unleash the second wave. And when the third wave hit, well, the world would never quite be the same again. The Women's Auxiliary for Party Unity My Ass of Wichita, Kansas was in full season. They were just getting started with the meeting when a few new members wandered in, muttering under their breath. One by one, those present lost interest in the meeting and focused on the newcomers. There was nothing unusual about this, but the agenda wasn't completed. The punch tasted a little funny, too. Had someone added strawberries to it? The main speaker went to the podium and said, "I'd like to welcome our new sisters to sit down on the other side of the circle. We have a great deal to discuss and not a lot of time to speak about it in." One of the newer members sat down and raised her hand. "Yes," the speaker said. "Well, it has come to our attention that we should all serve Jarvi." A low murmur began, and the speaker banged her gavel, demanding silence. When she had control once more, she said, "Sorry? I'm afraid I don't understand what you said. Could you please repeat that?" "Yes, we should all serve Jarvi." The newcomer said it louder and clearer this time. The woman at the podium frowned and looked down. The murmur had shifted to confusion. "What in the hell are you talking about?" the speaker demanded. "We should all serve Jarvi." At this point, all of the other members of the Women's Auxiliary for Party Unity My Ass of Wichita, Kansas spoke in unison. "Indeed, we should all serve Jarvi." At this point, the main speaker shrugged and smiled. "In the meantime, I think we should talk about the agenda to hold our local legislators accountable." The New Hampshire state legislatures were upset about the lack of progress of their bill. Ed, the legislator's page, had fallen asleep 5 times already as they discussed obscure parliamentary procedure that ultimately meant very little to him. He tried to pay attention, but he just kept drifting off. At one point, they all said something about, "Jarvi is our Lord and Master." Then they all broke down and said it at the same time, which jolted Ed awake. He looked around, trying to find out what was up. They were all saying the same things, but now they were all saying it in an even more boring fashion. Ed rubbed his eyes, looked around. What had happened? Had he actually heard that? Normally, he'd have just written it off, but as he looked around, it was more like something was dead in their eyes. He almost wrote it off entirely, but he decided against it. He got up, looked around the hall for another page. Bella was nearby and looked wide awake. He pulled her into a conference room. She followed, curious. Ed looked at her wordlessly and waited for a reaction. She looked at him and shrugged. Ed scratched his head and motioned for her to follow him out of the conference hall towards a nearby small meeting room. She scrunched her nose and whispered, "What is it? Don't they seem kind of odd to you?" "Ed, they always seem odd." Ed sighed. Maybe he was going crazy. "So you didn't see anything different?" She shook her head. "Not really. What did you see?" "They seemed dead. Drugged, maybe." Belle thought about it a moment and shrugged. She said, "Sorry, didn't see anything." "Must have been his imagination." Ed said, "Thanks." He went back in and drifted back to sleep. Mortimer knew that the students of the lab were bored, but the way they were glued to their screens was more than a little odd. What struck him with particular interest was how they were almost all moving in sync. What was up with that? He looked around and he noticed that they were all on the same website. He looked over and looked a little closer and saw a guy about his own age typing over and over again, "Jarvi is our Lord and Master. Jarvi is our Lord and Master. Jarvi is our Lord and Master." He typed it 3 times into an email and then sent it to someone else. What in the hell? It was like some kind of spam, but if it was, why were they sending it? And if it was some kind of subliminal message, why wasn't it affecting him? Jarvi laughed at the money rolling in. He wasn't really planning on using it. It was the principle of the thing. Then he realized he was laughing like some kind of cheap supervillain. Was he really that much of a cliché? He looked at Laura, who seemed to be enjoying her book. He asked, "Do you think I'm a cliché?" She said, almost mechanically, "No, I do not." Jarvi snapped his fingers angrily. "Cut that out." "Well, do you want an honest answer, or do you want the answer that you want to hear?" "The honest answer, always. Truth was always better in great doses. All right, here's the truth. You do seem a bit stereotypical. I mean, you're destroying the world on a bet. You had a horrible, repressed life, and you're taking it out on the world." She took a bite of her apple and put the book down. Jarvi sneered. "If I'm that boring, then why do you want to hang out with me? First of all, because you got me out of prison. Second, because cliched characters never stay that way in the real world. So I'm thinking that at some point you're either going to stop the whole zombie thing, or want to stop the whole zombie thing, and change in some other way that I haven't thought of yet." What kind of an answer is that? "I think you can learn a lot more from a question that you asked than any answer I'd give." She took another bite of her apple. For a brief moment, it was as if she was trying some bizarre Eve metaphor. "Clarify. Okay. The question you asked me was, do I seem like a cliché? You are living inside your own head, Jarvi. I'm merely here to help make the ride seem more real. You spend more time talking about you than asking about me. Sure, you read my profile and asked about what got me into prison, but you're not really interested in me. I'm cool with that. The truth is, I'm at a jail and I'm alive. It's the moment that counts, and right now I'm just moving from moment to moment. You are a show that I'm very curious about watching." At first, Jarvi was angry. He was very angry. But then he realized something. If he punished her, wouldn't he be the very stereotype that he was worried about being? Would he indeed be using her for his own ends? He didn't want to be that way. What's that book you're reading?" he asked. She laughed and pulled up the cover. It was of Mice and Men. She said, "I like it because it makes me feel smart when I read it. There's no deeper meaning to it than that. And Jarvi, you aren't going to change just because you suddenly started asking me questions. Besides, what's wrong with being a stereotype?" Jarvi frowned. He did want to avoid being a stereotype, but it wasn't going to stop the bet either. He was pretty sure chaos wouldn't let him, even if Jarvi wanted to. It was only his power giving Laura the mark that kept her safe. Not that he should care. Floyd had been hiding for 8 straight days. At first, he found it amusing that he could make his Econ 101 class believe anything he told them 3 times. But now he was seeing the same look on the police, on the evening news, and in all kinds of totally random people on the street. He'd been wandering for 3 days without eating and without sleeping. He kept worrying that the pod people would take him, but he never saw any pods. He did find a cop waiting at his apartment. His rational mind told him that his roommates might have just been worried about him. Fuck his rational mind. Pod people were taking over the world, and he wasn't going to let them. A light showed down in the alley he was in. There was a brief flare of a siren and a bullhorn. "You there!" They had found him. They weren't going to take him alive. He pulled a paint gun up in front of him and marched towards the cop with his finger on the trigger. Stop! Stop there right now! There was a gunshot, but it missed by a wide margin. Floyd kept moving forward, firing the paint gun. There was another gunshot, and he felt more pain than he'd ever known. But Floyd kept moving forward. He wasn't going to go down alone. Ow, fucker! The cop was upset. Good. It was only a moment that he blacked out before he saw the look in the cop's eyes. This guy wasn't a pod person. Floyd tried to apologize. Sorry. Thought you were. The officer swore and pulled a staple out of his neck while he was wiping paint from his eyes. He got on the radio. Man down. Fucker went after me with a paint gun. Pod person, Floyd whispered before he passed out. Floyd woke up inside an ambulance. He thought he was a dead man. He tried to talk to the paramedic sitting next to him that stroked his hair and whispered, You'll be fine, don't talk. Floyd relaxed. At least, he relaxed until she leaned over and whispered into his ear, What I tell you 3 times is true. Jarvi is your lord and master. Floyd struggled against his bonds. He could feel the words crawling around inside his head, but he was strapped down and couldn't do anything. What I tell you 3 times is true. Jarvi is your lord and master. He headbutted her and she swore. She sneered at him and turned up the IV drip. She whispered in his ear, What I tell you 3 times is true. Jarvi is your lord and master, and you're going to die before you get to do anything about it. And on the 5th day, Jarvi decided it was time to unleash round 2 upon the earth. And Jarvi was pleased. And lo, there were 20 seemingly harmless freighters prepared by Jarvi for the full distribution of the bioplague. Yea, these boats were full of frothing blood zombies, and they did go forth upon the shores and rend most of the people they encountered in twain and ate them. And the rest rose up also as blood zombies. And lo, the government covered it up because they didn't want the population to panic. Most of the population didn't pay attention because of all the snarks telling them that there was nothing to worry about. At least at first. But slowly the video started to get out on YouTube, and by the beginning of the 6th day, lo, there was much weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. And Jarvi laughed, but he did not laugh like a maniac because he did not want to be a shallow mad scientist stereotype. And Laura did smirk, and Jarvi did notice this and yell at her to stop smirking, and she did smirk more, and lo, there was much sulking and pouting and clenching of fists, and finally Jarvi said, What do you fucking want me to do, laugh maniacally? And she said, Whatever floats your boat, hon, you want it honest. And Jarvi said, Fine. And Laura said, Whatever. And Jarvi laughed hysterically and found it cleansing. And Laura thought it was pretty cool and joined in. And lo, they did laugh together hysterically as 1,000 blood zombies swarmed on Los Angeles. And then the Lord Jarvi said it was good. Shut up! This has been Rhombus Ticks reading to you from the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. All of these products are available on Amazon.com and other marketplaces. Copyright 2015 Red Anvil Amalgamated. Sound editing by Grayson Bergmann. Initial bumper by Electro Rock Cardiogram. To fight the forces of evil!